Well, my parents had a really rough time through their marriage, and they ended up separating. And after they separated, my father committed suicide 6 months later. So, you know, the whole separation and divorce thing was devastating in my life as a kid. So going into my first marriage, you know, I didn't have any role models, God, Jesus, a church family. That wasn't even part of my world. And so my husband and I both came from backgrounds that were very unstable. And so we both came into the marriage like really so unhealthy in so many ways. And in many ways it was doomed.
You leave the first husband not long after you're married.
Mm-hmm.
Gord, your new husband, begins an affair that lasts 2 years. Mm-hmm. What did you grapple with as you realized the truth that was hitting you?
Well, there were a few things I had to grapple with. First of all, the focus was on me. How could someone do this to me? Of course, I was devastated, and the other person involved in the triangle was actually a very good friend of mine. So it was like a double betrayal. But at the same time, I had to look at myself, honestly, and think of what I had done to my first husband. You know, and those were things that I had to work out inside of myself and work those out with God.
Let's talk about starting to bring God into such a messy relational problem. How does it happen for you?
Well, in my first marriage, God didn't exist in my life. I mean, I believed in God, but there was no relationship with Him. I never went to church except for a wedding or a funeral. But it was a few months into my relationship with Gord that we started looking for a church to attend. I had given my life back to God a couple of months prior to that because I ended up in the bottom of a ditch in an automobile accident, and that really was a turning point for me. It's when I left my marriage, it's when I came back to God in a huge way. And so we were looking for something. I knew that I was following God, and Gord was, he knew that there was something missing in his life. So as two people who were now, I would say a couple, we started looking for a church. And we happened to find a church. It was a little Baptist church, and it was at that church that we learned that we shouldn't be living together if we wanted to be on the worship team. That if we were going to live together, then, you know, perhaps I needed to think about, you know, dissolving my first marriage legally. And so, I mean, it was a tricky situation, you know. But we did go ahead, and I was able to get a divorce, and then we ended up getting married. And really, this little church, I mean, it was such a foundation for us in starting our marriage.
I want to take you to this marriage that hit such a rocky time.
Mm-hmm.
So your marriage with Gord begins to completely unravel over the adultery. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to make it work, to say, I'm not going to give up?
Well, I think because I did not want to be a failure. I did not want to be a single mother, because we had our child 1 year after our first, 1 year after we got married. We had a baby now, and I didn't want to be a single mother, and I didn't want to be a failure. And I knew deep down inside of me, I really knew that God had put Gord and I together. I really felt strongly about that, as absurd as it might seem, you know, leaving one husband and rushing into this new marriage. I really sensed God was in it, that there was something there. And so I really fell more in love with Jesus. I went to Him. I felt like, what else do I have in my life at this point? And I handed everything over to Him. And I remember specifically having this banner that was like in my head, and it said, faith, have faith. And I just pressed into that, and I called out to God. I looked to Him. He was everything to me, and He is the one that pulled me through. And He is the one, more than anything, that gave me the unconditional love for Gord. See, once I found out about the affair, I mean, things had been going on for a long time. I suspected, You know, everything in me was telling me one thing, but people were not telling the truth.
Tell me about forgiving him.
You know, forgiveness, I can't believe what a gift it is. When you accept your responsibility, it can be such a huge release and such a huge gift. And what I mean by that is that I did not do it on my own. I asked God for forgiveness, and He gave it to me. He put something in my heart that allowed me to forgive my husband.
And you do believe it's your commitment to God that saved your marriage?
Totally.